Through different emotions. I don't know about you, but mine can bounce around just like these ping pong balls or these lottery balls that come out of the chute very rapidly. And the way things are going now, it might be partly my age, but it seems as if things that engender emotions are coming more rapidly at us. I just love this painting. It's at that exhibit of Sharon Sherpa that's at the Monterey Museum of Art. It's going to be there until the 26th of November. The other exhibits will be there until the December 17th. But it just seems as if whether it's a Nazi raid in Madison or threats of war or war going on, he just really hit it when he did this in 2012. And I feel as if that Rubik's Cube is just clicking madly. I can actually hear the clicking of it going on today. Well, Armand Rion, who was a Belgian painter, only known for these self-portraits that he did between 1900 and 1930, really hits the nail on the head, I think, in terms of art, showing us behind our masks, we're having all sorts of different emotions all the time. And we're going to start with sorrow and have some of the more negative emotions so that we can end on a happier note with joy. I love this painting of the tears coming from our sad clown and paired it with the crying spider. You remember Odilon Redon from our very first class. He's the one who showed us Cyclops. Popko Roy Lichtenstein's Crying Women of the 60s. Although it looks like we're having cartoon time here, Lichtenstein only used the cartoon form as a format, I think, to actually criticize some of the memes, the stereotypes that we have. For example, the crying woman, who is often shown crying perhaps over a lost love affair in her feminine weakness. These two women were created by Picasso for an entirely different reason and for the same reason, and that is that they are showing grief over the loss of a child during war. Looking at the Cubist work, which is sometimes hard to really identify with, look at how he breaks it up into shards, into what these sharp pieces that can grate. And the colors, the contrast of the warm and the cool colors together is also very grating. As I said last week when we showed the picture of the Vietnamese man with his dead child during the war in Vietnam, it's becoming an icon of war. And that last picture was from Guernica. I've shown it so often. It's a very large mural done in 1937 with Picasso's heartfelt anguish over the bombing of a small town in Basque, Spain. Here it is showing the loss of civilians, the sort of the side bit of war that we're seeing so often on the news. There is the grieving mother on the left. On the right, a woman with her hands raised. You can almost hear the neigh of that horse screaming. Down at the bottom, the dead of the war. And I want you to just look at the bottom a little bit more closely and see one symbol of hope that I'm going to be showing in a little bit. The scream, I think, really is a good symbol of some of the feelings we have today, sort of being attacked from all sides by the weather, by politics, by war. Munch said, I sense a scream passing through nature. I painted the clouds as actual blood. The color shrieked. I love that combination of the two senses of sight and sound there. I chose the scream as one of the pieces that you could do for writing with the masterpieces that we're going to start in 2 weeks. Perhaps you want to write on how your emotions are being flipped around today by what's happening. Or you can do some research and find out really what kind of things that Monk was screaming about in this picture. So here is an entirely different approach to showing what Peter Paul Rubens is saying are the consequences or the horror of war. There's our Rubenesque lady in the front with her pulchritude. She is Venus once again, and she's trying to hold Mars back from going to war because of all the consequences. Look at the woman in black on the left. Again, that stereotypical upraised arm about the anguish of war. She's Europe. And there's a little a little Puto there, back there, a little angel type character who's holding a world globe saying, this is destroying us. Down on the bottom, underneath Mars' feet, are literature and art that are being trampled by war. And there are many other different symbols. So that is the way that Rubens chose to show his anguish over war. Along with Guernica, I'd say that the 3rd of May, 1808 is one of the greatest works that have been done on the tragedies of war, once again showing what happens to the civilians. This is the 3rd of May is the day that there was an uprising against what happened on the 2nd of May, which Goya also painted, which is the troops of Napoleon coming in so that Napoleon can bring the whole court in so that the French can occupy Spain. So there were local uprisings. This man is being executed as part of that. You see that somebody has already died down below. Look at the drama, the chiaroscuro there, the contrast between the black and the colors. And then if you see his upraised hands, and it reminds you perhaps of the crucifixion, it's not by accident. Goya painted the stigmata on his hand, which was the mark of the nail wound in Christ. Goya also did in the upper left a whole series called The Disasters of War. It wasn't really published until after these uprisings and really after many, many years. But he did his noirs, just like I explained about the noirs with Verdon, the first class, these dark drawings of the consequences of war. Here is Picasso again, a piece very much like Guernica. This is inspired by some of the atrocities performed as he saw them by Americans during the Korean War. It is based on Goya's 3rd of May with the execution. Max Ernst was a German who had gone to France to work on his art, work with other surrealists. And he was also a veteran of World War I that he found very, very traumatic, and it influenced him his whole life. Look at the barbarians of war. They remind you of the demons we talked about in our first class. In the back, you see happy children, people playing, but these monsters of war are walking toward us and are destroying the land. In both this and Europe After the Rain down below, he's using a technique where he puts the paint on and then he scratches it off to show ruin here. It is called ritage, and it's sometimes done with scraping cardboard. When Max Ernst, as a German, not a Jew, but as a German in France, was put into exile in the south of France by the French as an undesirable citizen, he decided to come to New York, and finally he came to live in Sedona, Arizona for over 10 years. The thing that I think is so incredible is that the rocks that he lived among are so much like the rocks that he painted 2 years before in Europe after the rain, which really means Europe after the destruction of World War II. The Face of War by Dali is scary, as is war. The skull with the eyes and the mouth filled with other skulls, in which there are future skulls, talking about the infinite stream of wars that we've had. We're reminded of Escher's eye that we saw in our very first class. Here's Lichtenstein again. As I said, his cartoons have another message. There are many in pictures that I'm not showing today talking about triumphs of war. I'm thinking about the Marseillaise in France, the triumph and the triumph walking over the dead bodies, that type of thing. And sometimes the actual bombings can be celebrated. Oh, look, we were successful in bombing this or that. In this, the bombardier is saying, I press the fire control and ahead of me, rockets blaze through the sky. Oh, what a triumph. And what a killing. When World War II was going on, I was about 6 years old. I was, from the time I was 3 to the time I was 8, we were doing war on the home front in California, in the United States. And I lived very close to Lockheed, where warplanes were being made. I didn't realize at that time, when I drew this painting of a bomber, that several years later, I would marry a man much older than I, who was a bombardier and a POW in World War II. Here are two different works of art that have come out recently. The one on the left was the New Yorker cover, and talked about both of these having the mother and children as symbols of the agony of war. On the right is one that I got recently from the war in the Middle East. And then very recently, there was an article in the Atlantic called Not a World War, but a World at War. And it said, the past 2 years have seen the most conflicts of any time since the end of the Second World War. So maybe it's not just age that makes me feel as if things are speeding up. I asked you to look at the bottom of Guernica. Did you see the picture, the symbols on the left? The broken sword, the sign of peace, and the little flower that is growing out of the ruins of the civilian house that had been bombed by the Germans during 1937 Spanish Civil War. So sometimes, I don't know how much it works, but the artist hand can be mightier than the sword. Picasso, who went through so many different periods and style, all groundbreaking, did this middle picture in 1901, this sweet picture of a child with a dove. He went on to create the dove as a symbol of peace in art. It was on stamps. Here on the right, you see a poster that he did for a disarmament conference in Paris. This is what Marc Chagall did in the United Nations as a tribute to Dag Hammarskjöld, who had been the Secretary General and worked so hard for peace. Throughout it, you see all sorts of symbols of peace, a child being kissed by an angel and flowers. You see the crucifix in the upper right for the sacrifice. You see all sorts of symbols of different religions and different symbols of peace. And this was done by Banksy. I've shown in class before some of the graffiti that he did in Ukraine during the Ukraine war. And this is something that he did in 2005 on the West Bank, where the soldier or the civilian is throwing instead of a bomb a bouquet of flowers. It reminds us of Tiananmen Square when somebody who was hoping for peace put a flower in the gun of a tank. We'll go shift a little bit toward grief and compassion, which of course go with what we just were talking about. A lot of people thought that Picasso had a blue period because he only had blue paint to work with because he was so poor. But most think it's because he witnessed the suicide of his dearest friend, you see in the coffin up top, and went through a period of Great Depression. You see in both of these pictures here the family in a picture called The Tragedy. We don't know what the tragedy is. And the guitarist. Look at how the blue is giving you the somber feeling, and also the elongation of the figures, something that El Greco does so well. So there is emotion behind them of great sorrow. The quintessential idea of compassion is for the passion that was done in the religious art that started in the Byzantine. You see here the sad Mary. You see on the right the sad John the Baptist. And when you see the face of Christ, you commiserate. You feel that, and you're drawn into the church. This is the intention. That's why I said that art can elicit emotions and it can bring people into a cause. But when you compare the sadness of Mary and of John the Baptist, you can see what a groundbreaker Giotto was in 1306. Look at the agony and the body position of that angel that I've shown in detail, and the compassion, the grief of Mary looking down at her dead son. Look at the character in the pink shawl up above Mary Magdalene, up above the side on the right, Mary Magdalene, and the arms tossed back. So the painting is one showing the grief. It's called, of course, a lamentation. A lamentation is just a code name for all these pictures showing compassion for the passion. We can't show that one without showing Mary and her son, where his crumpled body matches the drapes of her garment. All of it wilting, the whole thing was wilting and showing sorrow. I always match it up with W. Gene Smith's photograph where he is talking about the poisoning in the water in Minamata in Japan. It's a mercury type poison, and this child, this adult here that is being bathed by her mother, was severely affected. In trying to get some attention for this poisoning, which happens all over the world, W. Gene Smith used the Pietà as a sort of a way to give homage to both. Now, as we look at the Passion and we look at Christ's face and see the contrast with the people who are the soldiers of Pontius Pilate, who are making fun of him, we start really identifying with what Christ was going through. Okay, did I scare you? It's a really scary image. It's a combination of the bleeding face of Christ and a Japanese mask from the No Theater. It is meant to scare. It is meant to elicit emotion, whether it's emotion of fear, or if it's the emotion of compassion. It's I thought of Jesus wept, the shortest passage in the Bible. It's very, very strong in its upfront simplicity. And here we've talked about this before, the body of the dead Christ in the tomb, which also is so shocking. The painting is a foot high by 6'7" long. We see a putrefying corpse. It is off-putting, it's grotesque. It makes us really think about what Christ as a human was going through. And here is an homage to that painting, but it's not Christ in the coffin. In this sculpture, it is a young black man. And that is from the Kehinde Wiley Archaeology of Silence exhibit. It was at the DeYoung Museum last summer. I know some of you were there. It was extremely profoundly moving. On the right, you see the lobby. And at the top is a quote from Kehinde Wiley to explain what the exhibit is about. That is the archaeology I am unearthing. The specter of police violence and state control over the bodies of young Black and brown people all over the world. So Kehinde Wiley, who's known for his portrait of Barack Obama and his pictures of great pieces of history shown with Black people, certainly has the intention of bringing a cause to the forefront. So that here in engendering emotion, he's certainly doing it with a cause. Let's look at a part of a video. I'm going to be putting the whole thing on my website, plus a couple of other Kehinde Wiley videos, because I think he's so important as an artist of today.
Kehinde Wiley is best known for his distinctive portrait of Barack Obama, becoming the first Black artist to paint a presidential portrait. But Wiley has spent most of his career painting vibrant portrayals of everyday African-American men and women. A new exhibition of his work focuses on grief and mourning, and also asks, whose lives have value? Jeffrey Brown traveled to San Francisco for our Arts and Culture series, Canvas.
A monumental painting 25 feet long. A young Black man, limbs twisted, lying amid a colorful floral field. A contemporary image of grief and death that also evokes the history of image making itself. Artist Kehinde Wiley.
There's a tradition, and I love the tradition of painting that comes from Western Europe. I've spent much of my life learning it and trying to master it. And in a lot of that stuff, I see sadness, but I also see dignity and respect. I see people looking at the life of Christ or the life of a fallen soldier and valuing their lives so much to make really great, beautiful works of art out of it. I wanted to use that language and turn it towards people who look like me.
The exhibition, An Archaeology of Silence, at San Francisco's DeYoung Museum, dramatic in its scale and lighting, presents paintings and sculptures, 25 works in all, that use the iconography of art history to expose violence against Black men and women today. An ancient sculpture, The Dying Gaul, from 200 BC. Now a young man in a hoodie taking his last breaths. The Virgin Martyr Saint Cecilia, a 1610 Italian marble sculpture, now transformed by Wiley into a large painting of a contemporary woman. The pain, but also the passion and power, so often captured in the history of Western religious art and portraiture.
I'm telling a story about a group of people who for centuries have been ignored and forgotten. And I'm using the language of the epic, the heroic, even the elegiac, the sort of sadness that surrounds a lot of these big monuments, to be able to make someone feel special again, to make someone feel fully formed, mourned after. I don't know, is it a sad show, or is there something here that says that there's a bit of growth and a bit of light in the midst of all of this sadness.
Well, I wonder myself, what do you see? You're the creator here.
That's right. That's right. I mean, I guess what I'm doing is I'm creating a provocation.
Today, one of the world's most celebrated artists, in part for his 2018 portrait of Barack Obama, the 46-year-old Wiley grew up in South Central Los Angeles, one of 6 children raised by his mother, Freddie Mae Wiley. He credits her and public tuition-free art programs, including one that sent him to Russia at age 12, for both encouraging his talents and allowing him to first see famed artworks of the past. After graduating from the San Francisco Art Institute and Yale's Master of Fine Arts program, he quickly became an art world star, known for putting ordinary black men and women into the historical frame, often finding his models through what he calls street casting, approaching people on the street to ask if he can paint them. Wiley spent much of the pandemic in Senegal, where he's established a studio and arts residency program. The works in An Archaeology of Silence were mostly painted there, using local residents as models.
The whole point here, I suppose, is domination, that the painting dominates, that it subsumes you, it consumes you.
One thing he was concerned with here, heroic scale, but also the small details of a life.
It's about every small detail that goes into a person's day-to-day, how they adorn themselves in the morning and how they dress themselves. And this is simply slowing down and paying attention to every single detail of a life, every single crease and fold of a hand, every single hair follicle. Precious.
Here is a comparison of one of the pieces in the show with the Holbein. You notice that all of the characters there were prone, and so he was definitely influenced greatly by the Holbein. The sculptures, I know that there's one member of the class who told me that the sculptures got to her the most. The lighting in the show was incredible, putting just the right spotlights on the details that bring out, certainly for me, bring out our emotions and identify with these figures. It was so moving that the DeYoung set up 2 respite rooms, one of them on the same floor, right, a door right off the exhibit. You see at the top right the people who are walking into it, and all those little cards up there. The people in the bottom picture are getting the cards and looking at some of the literature. And so you could put down some of the feelings you had about the exhibit. What I put down was, I'm teary over the beauty of the art and the ugliness of the message. This is what you see when you go out, this giant rearing horse. You saw the rearing horse with Napoleon on it a couple of times already today, where the triumphant person in war has that sort of victory stance. But here we have a fallen soldier on the horse. You see that same thing in this. It's a painting of a frieze, so it looks like it's sculpture. This is in our Capitol Rotunda. On the right side, you see that rearing horse in triumph, upon which is a fellow who will later be the Vice President of the United States, in triumph over the death of the Native American Tecumseh on the far right. I think along with the fallen soldier that we saw in the video, I think this wounded Indian is a beautiful example of the grief and anguish and pain the Native Americans have gone through. Today, there's so much that now is bringing awareness to that. I know that they have the Killers of the Flower Moon, the great film that's out. Little Bird is being shown on PBS, as well as Native America on PBS. On the right, I show a newspaper from San Quentin. I did another little segment on the art of the incarcerated. And this one I saved to show this is a Native artist who is being able to put out his generational pain as well as his personal pain of incarceration through his art. I love these slaves. They're in the basement of the Louvre. I love them partly because they're unfinished and it looks as if they're coming out of the stone. Michelangelo said, the images are inside the marble. I just find them. But look at the body language of trying to get out of bondage, like we've just talked about with African Americans, with Native Americans, with the incarcerated, just this anguish that we see just through the body language. We also look back at our first class looking at Prometheus when he was bound to the rock. Here's somebody else, some other figures who in history, the burghers of Calais, this statue by Rodin is in the town square at Calais, just a hop, skip, and jump across the channel from England, who during the Hundred-Year War had invaded France and said, look, if you find 6 of your townspeople who will sacrifice their lives for this town, will save this town, they have to come out carrying the keys to the castle and the keys to the town. So these burghers, who were not finally executed, by the way, but they thought they were going to be, are coming out with the nooses around their necks and in anguish leaving the town. I loved this version on the Stanford campus. Diane Levinson had a whole class on the public art of Stanford. You can look it up. Rodin said that he really liked having the burghers separated the way they are at Stanford. I was just really moved by the one on the left that I shot to share with you. So why am I showing you a picture of a bird? Well, for one thing, it was on the cover of the Goldfinch, and the Goldfinch seemed to be on the top of the bestseller list forever, even though Donna Tartt put the Goldfinch painting in the Metropolitan Museum in New York when it's actually at the Mauritshuis in The Hague, where I went to see it, as well as the Girl with the Pearl Earring on the trip I told you about last week. So it's small, it's sweet, it's trompe l'oeil, which means it looks almost real, but there's more to it. It's only when you look closely that you see that the bird is not free. It is tied by a chain to the box that it's sitting on. I think many of you might know the artist here, so I'm letting you guess. He started with graffiti. Here are 2 that he did in his cartoon style, again, cartoons with so much meaning behind them. He did this for apartheid, and you can see the person in shackles who's trying to kick off his chains. That's Keith Haring. He died at age 31 of AIDS, which was a sort of cause that he worked for among many other causes. On the left, you see what looks like graffiti, but look at the big like mask that the character on the left is wearing. I pointed it out among the demons in the very first class. He is trying to scare the person on his knees who is surrendering. Look at the words that are coming out of his mask. Those are the symbols for the atomic bomb. So again, we're back to the theme of Oppenheimer that we had in our first class. We're now going to go into looking at Van Gogh and his process through working through melancholy, clinical depression, despair, hopelessness that led to his taking his life. And this is called Sorrowing Old Man, or At Eternity's Gate, which means that he's at the end of his life. And it's at the Kroller-Müller Museum in Ottawa that I visited on that trip that we've been talking about. It's a small museum. It is devoted to the paintings of Van Gogh, with a few ones that might have influenced Van Gogh, like the Cyclops that I showed in our first class. Here you see some of the Van Goghs, and up at the top, you will see a quote. Down below, I took a photograph of this quote. I don't know if you'll understand that one can speak poetry just by arranging colors well. Well, I sent this to Renee Curry, a friend and fellow teacher. I take all of her classes, and she's in our class, because I think it's a beautiful way of talking about how art, including music, including literature and poetry, can arrange either words or music or colors well to engender understanding or emotion in the viewer or listener or the reader. They started with the beginning, and these are some of the ones that Van Gogh did. He only painted for about 10 years, starting when he was age 27. He passed away at the age of 37, leaving more than 900 works. He sold one. The left, you see just sort of the beginning of his style that we get to know him from. I think you see it mostly in that napkin down on the left, but you really see it in how he molded the face of his fellow Dutch citizen where he was when he first started painting. Look at these self-portraits. The one on the left is at the Kroller-Müller. The other two are elsewhere. And this one on the left, it looks almost like a drawing. It doesn't really look like a full painting. It looks like maybe it was done with watercolor instead of with oils. And he looks very unsure. He's looking at us, or looking at himself as he paints himself, kind of an unsure look. The one in the middle is rather shocking. It shows his Japanese influence, greatly influenced by Japan in his art. You see that on the right, in this picture of him after he quarreled with Gauguin and cut off his ear in one of his many bouts with mental illness, there is a woodblock from Japan behind him. We know him so well from his sunflowers, but he also did sunflowers gone to seed during that time that he was in Arles and having so many problems with his mental health. Notice how each one is separately done. It's not sort of a mishmash of flowers. At the height of his style that he was showing in Arles, the flowers, even though they're going to seed, really come alive with the way that he manipulates the squiggly lines that he uses. Also at the Kroller-Müller, they had the church at Auvers. Auvers-sur-Oise is where Van Gogh spent the last 4 months of his life. He had been in the mental asylum in Saint-Remy that he committed himself to because of his problems in Arles. And he checked himself out, and he went to have some peace, try to heal in Auvers. This is the church in Auvers, and you can see that it's rather stiff, Romanesque kind of a church. And look at how it comes to life in that painting. And at Auvers, where you can go, as I have, looking at the graves of Vincent next to his brother Theo, very close, and we know them well from all their letters. And here we have a picture of, really, he's at the height of his powers during his last months. It's on the cover of a book I bought at the Van Gogh Museum. When I went there on this last trip, they were having a special show on his last months at Auvers. Here we are now at the Van Gogh Museum. You enter into the lobby down below as we did with the Mauritshuis, as you do at the Louvre. Look at the paintings at the very back of the lobby. Those were continually changing. Sometimes it's all one painting, but here you have his different trees in blossom. And the one in the upper right, we're going to be talking about in a few minutes. While he was there, he said, the only time I feel alive is when I'm painting. In this exhibit, they showed his palette and some of his paints. Actually, it was a palette he borrowed from a doctor friend who was his mentor, his friend, and fellow artist and art collector. And that's Dr. Gachet, who is shown on the left. He is shown in a melancholy way, according to Van Gogh, because he too experienced melancholy. Also, it shows his compassion, perhaps, while he's listening to Van Gogh. I'm pairing that with this portrait, the self-portrait that Goya did with his doctor when he was extremely sick, near death. And down at the bottom, you can see that writing. The writing said it's dedicated to the doctor who saved my life. On the right is a picture of a detail from his painting of Van Gogh's painting, The Good Samaritan. Theo, his brother, was a good Samaritan, always by his side, trying to help him with his problems. And so was Dr. Gachet. Here's the whole picture of the Good Samaritan. And he actually, in the title, it's the Good Samaritan after Delacroix. Delacroix is a romantic painter, French romantic painter, who shows the scene in a romanticized, dramatic way. I think that there might be a little bit more human emotion in the left, but that just might be because of the way that I feel with the way that Van Gogh has painted it. Here are two pictures that he did in the last months of his life. The happy, joyous the landscape on the left with that wonderful sky. You can see the impasto, which is the raised paint that he's done in those clouds. You can actually see it sticking out. On the right, we have a night scene. It's reminiscent of the Starry Night, which he did in the asylum when he was at Saint-Remy. Look at the cypress tree. It's cutting the picture in half. The Metropolitan Museum of Art had a whole show on Van Gogh's cypresses, which I'm taking a little side trip to talk about. Their theory was that the cypresses have always been a symbol of death, and shown here on the Island of the Dead. Also, you find them in cemeteries, and they feel that the use of the cypress trees in Van Gogh's art were sort of predicting his suicidal thoughts. In Starry Night, I really never paid much attention to the cypress tree before. We look so much at the moving sky. Sometimes we feel that the motions might have something to do with the mad demons that were running around in Van Gogh's head. He says that he's applying himself to canvases with all my attention. During that almost 70 days, he did more than 74 paintings. It was thought for a long time that the wheat field with crows was his last painting, but it wasn't. But it is ominous, showing that stormy sky that's going to come over the wheat field, and also the flight of the crows. This is his last painting. The colors are dull. It really looks like an abstract, but it's not. It's actually a painting of the roots, which scholars have actually found the actual roots that are still by the side of a road in Auvers. There were in the exhibit some sympathy cards that were sent to Theo Van Gogh. And I think this one, signed by Gauguin, who he had fought with and fought with Van Gogh earlier, was really moving. You know that for me, he was a sincere friend and that he was an artist, a rare thing in our epoch. You will continue to see him in his works. As for me, I shall see him with my eyes and with my heart in his works. He is not dead. He lives for you, for us, and for everyone in the work he has left behind. Here are two tributes, one quite personal. Once again, you could put down your thoughts about this very moving exhibit and attach them to the rack on the way out. Instead, I had somebody take a picture of me with you, showing the feelings I was so moved. This is the self-portrait that Van Gogh brought with him from Saint-Remy to Auvers-sur-Oise. He looks calm, he looks self-confident, but once again, we have that turmoil in the background. We're back now from all the sad emotions and having joy. Of course, the sunflowers bring us joy. He said, I find comfort in contemplating the sunflowers. Here is that branch with almond blossoms I pointed out in the lobby of the Van Gogh Museum. Again, like with the sunflowers gone to seed, look how each blossom is rendered, as if it could be actually a separate little painting. This was painted in the last months of his life as a gift to his brother who just had a baby. The baby was called after Vincent. So that becomes the baby knew Vincent van Gogh in the year that Van Gogh died. I said I was going to be talking more about happiness, and there is a happiness book. It's related to the mindfulness book that I told you about in our first class. And on the cover of it is that painting. So there's 25 different paintings that have little essays on happiness. Well, here is the baby Vincent van Gogh, all grown up. The entire collection of Van Gogh's unsold paintings went to Theo, who died 6 months after Van Gogh did, and then to Theo's widow, who was instrumental in bringing fame to Van Gogh after he died, translating Theo and Vincent's letters, and actually selling some of his work. The paintings went to his nephew. Here he is at the Van Gogh Museum when it was first opened. He could be found there on many days working around greeting people. This is where the rest of the paintings were brought, and it's grown into a tremendous world famous museum. Let's look at another emotion, moments of awe. Just those moments when those demons that run around in your head are gone and you're just sort of like mindful and feeling the wonder that you had in childhood. Like I think is so beautifully portrayed in this Mary Cassatt painting. Here's another Mary Cassatt who was an American working with the Impressionists in Paris. Now, I know it's unusual to have that many pieces of furniture upholstered in the same way, but it makes for a cool background. But the thing that I love is how this girl who's probably been out playing with the exhausted dog is so exhausted from it herself. Her skirt's up, she's plopped down, and she's contemplating what a great time they had. I was pleased as punch when I found the painting on the right, which is homage to Clovis, the King of France, who was crowned at the age of 6. And here he is flopping the same way in his throne. Henri Matisse was a joyful painter. I say a joyful fauve. Fauve means beast, and that's what he and his contemporaries were called. They worked in the town of Collioure in the south of France near the border of Spain on the eastern part of the Mediterranean. With his candy colors, he creates joy by the way he puts them together and often shows sunlight and the outside coming inside. Here is his picture of the town of Collioure. If you go today, you will find posters of the art that has been done. They have an art walk showing views of Collioure done by the Fauves, and they even have an empty frame that you can see the seams through. His joie de vivre is joyful. It looks like sort of a stage set like we had with Morris Hirschfield last week. The people are frolicking in a type of an Arcadia. Look at all the curvy lines. They're arabesques like you see on Moroccan tiles in mosques. And it's like the arabesque you have in music, this theme that goes through the curvy line. You see people dancing in the background, people loving, and people just enjoying life. And I feel that it's very much like the center panel. Those of you who've been with me through all 21 classes know that this is my favorite painting, The Garden of Earthly Delights. Here's more dancing, dancing with life. Once again, you feel the music of the dance with that arabesque, that curvy line that has rhythm going through the dancers. It's hard to see here in the niches of this Albert Barnes collection in Philadelphia, but it's another version of the dance in this fabulous small museum that used to be in Barnes' house in the 20s, right around the crash when he was a multimillionaire, was able to get loads of impressionist paintings and modern art. He put it all over his house and said, this shall never change. I'm going to teach art to the underprivileged in my house. Well, it did change because it was in a residential area and it's come to downtown Philadelphia. And it's hung exactly the way it was in the house. You see on the left where it's hung in a usual way. He combines it with metal, sometimes furniture, in order to do, as we do in this class, make connections to help people understand the art. The one on the right is one from the Barnes collection by Pierre Bonnat, which I'm going to be talking about in a minute. Notice the joyful feeling of the blossoming and the happy colors that Bonnat uses. He was called the painter of happiness, and I'm putting on my website a really terrific video about Bonnat as the painter of happiness. He and his fellow Nabi were called that because a Nabi was a type of a prophet. And there was a poet who said, they are Nabi because they're prophets of modern art. Well, in the picture on the right, you do see sort of an abstraction, that wonderful mass of the mimosa on the left. You see stripes of happy rainbow on the left, but you know that you're really looking at an interior, looking out at a village. His wife had to take baths and for her health, so he has many pictures of her in the bath, which gave him a chance to really play with color. Color as it is in the tiles and the floor, and as it's reflected in the tub. Look at how he divides up the canvas on the right in a sort of a genre scene. He tips the table forward so we can see it. And he plays with design on design, from design in the window to the design in the drapes to the design of the still life. Here on the left, we have another tipped table, which we would call a little genre theme of if we were talking about Dutch 17th century art. Look at the dog. It's really kind of weird there. Well, it's actually based on a dog that Goya did. It is part of his noir period, Great Depression, when he was painting sad pictures. And as you look at them, and they're all in the Prado, and he's talking about, how the world was falling apart, all of a sudden you get this dog. Kind of a cool, like it's kind of a break from looking at the noirs or the capriccios. This exhibit, speaking of exhibits as we did so much last week, is one of the most magnificent I've ever seen. Such a beautiful blending of the art and the designer who put it together. So much so that I want to show you a short video about it and a little bit more about Bonnard.
This exhibition is absolutely unique because it pairs a master of design and colour, Pierre Bonnard, with another consummate artist of design and colour, India Madhavi.
Bonnard is known as a timeless genius, celebrated for his masterful approach to colour and depiction of intimate interior spaces. The majority of these masterpieces are coming from the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, which holds the most significant collection of works by Pierre Bonnard in the world.
Bonnard once said something really lovely about the way he wanted his own art to endure through time. He wanted to appear to the young painters of the year 2000 on the wings of a butterfly. He wanted his paintings to look fresh and as if they had just been painted.
This exhibition is completely different from all the Bonnard exhibition I saw before. I think that this scenography is very sophisticated and it is completely in harmony with Bonnard paintings.
I think with this exhibition, it's this beautiful exchange between public and private space as you go through the show. And when India Madhavi has been given, in a sense, a bit of a blank canvas to create a space for Bonnard's paintings, seeing her design coming into reality, that she really has an extraordinary painter's eye herself.
Color, for me, has become an expression. It's really something that I use in a very natural way. It's in my inner self. Space is not only about physical comfort or visual comfort, it's also emotional comfort. And I think that color brings that to me. It's really part of my expression. He always saturates the space of his paintings. The use of colors, the use of light is quite incredible. And I think this is what I try to do in this show. I love the domestic feel about it, and I think it also carries this sense of joy.
There is an absolute synergy between the work of Pierre Bonnard and the work of India Madhavi. It really is a mind meld, a marriage made in heaven.
Well, we're going to be going now into love. An emotion, well, it's not a single emotion of love. It can be sometimes very happy and sometimes very sad, but we're going to look most at the happy side, the love between two people. That love symbol was created by Robert Indiana, first in the painting that you saw the many different versions of it. It was on a stamp, in the sculpture. As I said last week, it influenced the AIDS sculpture in front of the Stedelijk Museum in Amsterdam, and also Yo Oe, that is in front of the Cantor Museum in Stamford right now. We're going to be looking now at Rococo. Fragonard is one of the masters of it, who shows love, the ideal of love in very fancy, very rich settings, gardens that probably never could grow with such lushness. Here you see the Cavalier, coming into the setting with a woman, her arms are out, she's ready to receive the suitor. And this is his quintessential picture of love that gets a little ribald. You see here the detail of the gentleman caller down below who's looking up her skirt, and she's sort of naughtily kicking off her slipper. I don't know if you remember or not, but in Olympia, Monet's Olympia, the prostitute who is sort of kicking off her slipper in the same way. So look at the fluffiness, look at the frilliness of this painting, and particularly set your eyes on this image of it all concentrated on the girl in the swing. You may have seen her again. She was the girl in Tangled. There she is, tossing the slipper, and in Frozen, a little slipper toss. I couldn't resist doing this cartoon. No, mine is appropriation of the Disney princess imagery as a critique of the hegemonic corporate paradigm of femininity. Yours is just Elsa. Well, I'm showing this because Rococo had a tremendous influence on mostly the animated features that Walt Disney did. So I have a short video about the exhibit that was held at the Metropolitan Museum in New York on the influence of Rococo on Walt Disney.
Over at our place, we're sure of just one thing. Everybody in the world was once a child. So in planning a new picture, we don't think of grown-ups and we don't think of children, but just of that fine, clean, unspoiled spot down deep in every one of us that maybe the world has made us forget and that maybe our pictures can help recall.
Young Walt was about to turn 17 when he first set foot in France, and the buildings, the art, and the atmosphere he came upon had an extraordinary influence on the animated world he would go on to create. Animating the inanimate was the guiding principle of Walt Disney Studios and the Rococo craftspeople. When visiting inspiring Walt Disney, the animation of French decorative arts, you will encounter the magic of these objects brought to life. What unites these worlds above all is an insistence on the magic of human connection and the awe-inspiring power of art, of artisanship, of humor, and of the universality of emotions. Art as a means of connecting us all. It is truly a tale as old as time.
That was something that really surprised me. I never thought about it. My father was a Disney animator, and Rococo was not part of our family conversations. We're going to go now into another aspect of love, and that is the kiss, which in ancient Rome was really a sign of greeting, although it could show some kind of other emotions. On the left, you have a Brancusi, and on the right, you have what I found in a thrift shop with my friend. And I said, "Oh, look, it looks like a Brancusi." She said, "Take a picture, show it to your class." I was thrilled to pieces. Here are two that maybe you can identify the artist. On the left, the artist is covering the face, which he often did, initial M. And on the right, it's a drawing, and he's deconstructing the face, the initial E. Well, those were Magritte and Escher. On the left, we have the famous Kiss by Rodin. You can see a version of it at Stanford. And then in the middle, you have something I saw recently in Carmel magazine, a sculpture called Origins, which again is the intertwined kiss. On the right, I also saw an ad recently for a sculpture figurine that was based on the kiss, but it also has influence by another artist. I wonder if you know who that is. Well, it's Gustav Klimt. You know him from his famous kiss. In our very first class, we showed the Beethoven frieze, that mural, which goes through the whole history of life, going through times with monsters and demons, but it ends up with a kiss. Klimt was a very sensual artist. He was very influenced by Freud as a fellow Viennese, and many of his works show a great deal of sensuality. And here it is, one of the most famous works that we've had in art history, his kiss. And I think it's worthy of a video.
We're in the Belvedere in Vienna, and we're looking at Gustav Klimt's The Kiss from 1908, probably the most famous Klimt. And actually, I have to admit that I had forgotten that the painting was almost a perfect square because I've seen it in so many posters where it's been cut down and made into a rectangle.
It's a very large painting, and there's so much gold that it's hard not to think of a religious icon. And I think in some ways, Klimt was trying to create a modern icon, something that suggested a sense of transcendence.
Well, there's no question that the gold here makes you think of the Byzantine tradition, maybe some of the tile work at Ravenna. There is the way that patterning, especially around the faces, becomes a kind of halo as well. You have Klimt building up the gold. He's got those gold circles. They actually rise off the surface of the canvas.
And catch the light, much the way that the gold was tooled in medieval paintings.
There is the sense of the male figure of patterns that are rectilinear in contrast to the curvilinear, to the circles and the ovals that we see in the female form. But the point that you made about the sense of the spiritual is so powerful in this painting. I think we forget that that darker gold ground seems so much as if the figures are somehow being dissipated into the cosmos, that they are so lost in the intensity, the eternity of that kiss.
And all removed from the everyday world. I mean, we have to remember that this is a time of incredible modernization in Vienna. The city of Vienna has been transformed in the previous 30 years into a modern city. Here, Klimt is abstracting a universal experience from the trauma, the difficulties, the anxieties of everyday life. I think it's also important to see this in relationship to Klimt's Beethoven frieze, where the figures confront evil forces, these mythic figures. And in the end, there's this embrace, this kiss, this emergence from evil into fulfillment and perfection. A minute ago, we were looking at the painting by Egon Schiele called The Embrace. But there was so much more of a sense of the physicality of the bodies, the way that the bodies really aren't present here and are cloaked in these decorative forms reminds us how much Klimt, although he was exploring this kind of sensuality, was also disguising it or covering it with a kind of decorative patterning.
And that's absolutely right, with the exception of the faces. And here, this is where the entire painting changes. The female figure is completely full frontal but horizontal, so that there's this beautiful sense of her passivity receiving that kiss, but also a kind of deep interior feeling with her eyes closed, her fingers just delicately touching his as he holds her head. And his neck reaches out and around, and you get a sense of his physical power through the strength of that neck, but also the intensity of his desire. And of course, they're both crowned. On his head, you can see a wreath of leaves. On hers, almost as if they were the stars of the heavens.
Schiele gives us an image of a couple that's electrified by kinds of agitated outlines.
Schiele is showing us a kind of truth through the energy of the moment, whereas Klimt seems to be reaching out to a truth that is for all time, that is so aestheticized it feels as if it has a degree of absolute permanence.
Well, once again, I couldn't resist a couple of cartoons. The one on the left is from there's been, I think, 2 volumes, maybe 3 now, of Great Housewives in Art. And if you notice the woman, she's holding a needle and a thread up at the very top. And the caption is, Mrs. Klimt sews a patchwork quilt. And on the right is, quit hogging the covers. So that brings us to love and marriage. Marc Chagall had a beautiful marriage with his dear Bella, who passed away before he did. They met in Russia in a small town. She was quite prominent. He was way below her class. The marriage wasn't approved. They had to flee Russia because of the persecution of the Jews. Even through that kind of a history, Chagall was able to say, art must be an expression of love or it is nothing. Let's just contrast that with what I put you through for the first part of the class, talking about emotions. And Chagall just exudes it in his paintings. Here they are, leaving Russia, flying over the unpronounceable town. And you can see a little bit of cubism on the green shirt up there. Chagall was amazing for having kept his childlike wonder that comes out in his paintings, the fantasy, and combining some of the things that were now in the 20th century. But he ignored so much of what was going on. Remember, this is a time that the Picasso was really very strong. So Chagall always kept his own spirit. I think this is just a quintessential love picture. It was done on the birthday of Chagall. He's commemorating that occasion. When he came in, Bella had been making a cake. She had flowers. He was just so happy to see her. They are both head over heels in love. He's twisting his body to be able to read his love. It's transformative in its feeling of the joy of love. And I thought of the photograph taken by Alfred Eisenstadt on VJ Day, the last day of World War II, going back once again to what we saw at the first part of the class, and now seeing a joyful sign of the end of war. And also that has been reproduced in San Diego by the sculptor Stuart Johnson, who does those sculptures that when you run into them, you think they're real and you're kind of upset, and then you realize that they're not. But he also did that really giant sculpture of Marilyn Monroe in Chicago. So there is the sculptural version. This painting is a painting of marital love. The woman is with child. She's holding on to her abdomen, and you see the man looking out, sort of saying, look, this is what we're going to be doing. They are in their bed chamber. They are barefoot because of the sanctity of the bed chamber. You will see that it's all sorts of signs of great wealth, like that chandelier. Their garments would have been very, very expensive. So it's celebrating that. It's also celebrating their success. You notice these shoes down there and the dog that is sort of on the alert. Sadly, in the back, there are shoes that are next to the bed. There are those scholars that say that that might be a sign that she didn't survive the birth. But also, I wanted you to look at that mirror. It goes back to the very first of our first class, when we're able to look at a room through a convex mirror. And so you see the back of the couple, and you see what could be us looking at it as viewers of the painting. But I think most often it's said that it's the artist who's at the door back there. Also, you might note that along the mirror behind glass are pictures from the Passion, from the crucifixion, showing that they're a religious couple. Well, here is Mr. and Mrs. Clark and Percy by David Hockney. That was a takeoff on the Arnolfini portrait. Very modern. He's showing a couple that he knows. He's doing their portrait. They are an actual couple. She is with child, as was the Arnolfini lady. The lilies, which are present at the Annunciation of Christ, saying that Mary is with child with Jesus, symbolize that. Up on the left-hand corner, you see a painting. That's a Hockney painting. We don't have a mirror here. We have a mirror of Hockney. On the right, we don't have a fancy chandelier, but what we do have is that kind of rococo-ish lamp on the right next to a rotary phone. Look at the man, not looking too happy. He's slouching in his chair. They're both looking out at us. He's looking rather glum, but like the upright puppy in the very last the picture that I showed, he has a cat in front of his pelvis, and it is stiff. Hockney gave it the name of Percy, although that wasn't the name of the actual cat. Percy is another name for penis in the UK. So there's story of what's going on here and the breakup of this marriage. You can find much more online, but I thought I'd give you just the gist of it. I chose it as the last painting that you can work from in writing with the masterpieces. You might write about marriage. You might write about comparing this with the Arnolfini portrait. You might write to Hockney and say, well, what are you trying to say in this painting? Anything goes. Prose, poetry, short story. The other ones that I've suggested up on the right are the Girl with the Pearl Earring and the Scream. We're going to start in a couple of weeks. There's time if you want to sign up. Love to have you. You write it home, and then you just read it for 3 minutes in class to share with the rest. Everything is on Zoom. So that's it for today.